Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. If you want the truth, don't close your eyes. We got our back against the wall, we gotta fight back. I need a theme song, this the right track. I ain't got no cape or no superpowers, just confidence and self-esteem, the world is ours. I believed in me when nobody didn't. This ain't no freestyle, just some facts that's written. Come on, let's hear it for the boy. He bringing pain at the same time, joy. I bob and weave through the crowd, so untouchable. At first they hate, then they loving you. It's a crazy cycle, but I'm going through it. I wish I was lying, that's why I show and prove it. I'm destined to be one of the best to do it. I ain't saying I'm the GOAT, but I'm closer to it. I should get a statue in the front yard. Man, I'm shooting up my stats like a shooting guard. Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Ayo, the mirror don't lie. Look at me, take a picture, it'll last longer. The mirror on the wall say I'm getting stronger.
Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Indian Nation Station pregame show right here on the Indian Nation Station. I'm your host AJ Ganger. With me as always, the one and only Brian Gillespie. Brian, tonight's the 127th meeting for the battered helmet as the Sidney Yellow Jackets will come to town to take on our Pickaway Indians as we look to bounce back from a 28-0 loss last Friday night.
I'll tell you what, it's a weird feeling around the football program this week. It's been a long time since you've seen them lose a regular season game. 19 in a row. It came to an end on Friday night, and really, Xenia just dominated them. So this week is kind of like a rebirth.
Yes.
Something, in practice, you kind of, as a coach, sometimes you have a tendency to, you get comfortable, the kids get comfortable, you're used to winning. Now we've knocked that out of, that consistency has gone away. So how do you handle that uncomfortable feeling of losing? Because the only time you lost is in the postseason the last couple of years.
Yeah, it was a very humbling experience on Friday night for a lot of guys too.
Yeah, I was very surprised at how Xenia just dominated the game from the kickoff. I think maybe, again, it's that comfort level. You feel pretty good about yourself, but maybe a little too good about yourself at some point. And Xenia was the hungrier team in that game, and they showed it from the kickoff.
Well, as we look at our remaining schedule, we sit at 3-1 right now overall. We got Sidney here tonight. Next week we go to Fairborn, and then we've got our homecoming game on the 30th against Greenville. We travel to Tip and Butler in back-to-back weeks in October and then finish the year out with Stebbins. We've been talking about this all year. In those last 2 weeks, Troy and Xenia were really going to be the gauges. Now when we look at this, it's Tip City, it's Stebbins even. I mean, Stebbins isn't the greatest football team ever, but they could do to us what Xenia did to us.
I'll tell you what, in my opinion, I think the whole looking ahead, the whole evaluating week to week, for this team, I think that's another place where they're going to have to shift their focus. It's going to circle back around, and it's going to be one game at a time. There are no guarantees. We have got to get better from last week. We have got to dominate our opponent when we're expected to, as we have. But City, not a pushover. They haven't had great results this year. I mean, they're 2-2 against mid-level competition or low-level competition. But you're not going to be able to look ahead anymore. Now we have to focus on ourselves. We have to focus on taking that standard back up to where it was so that once you do get to the postseason, which more likely it's a given that they're going to make the postseason, where are you then versus where are you the week you lost to Xenia?
Yep, I agree. Let's take a look at our scores from around the Miami Valley League last week. Fairborn ekes out the 1-point victory, 36-35 against Greenville. City takes down Butler 12-6. Tip City with the shutout over West Carrollton 64-0. Kind of a shocking game. Troy beat Stebbins 17-7 and then Xenia beat us. That Troy Stebbins game right there, that's kind of a shocker.
See, what's interesting, and this is sports in general, from one week to the next, man, Pick was riding high, absolutely destroyed their rival Troy. They go in and lose a rough one to Xenia. get bullied, muscled around the field, and then Troy goes the next week and beats an unbeaten Stebbins team. So you just never know with sports. That's why it's, especially with high school athletes, there's so many ebbs and flows with teenagers that it's very difficult to keep a certain level every week in and week out.
Yeah, it is. And, another thing, too, there's only 2 undefeated teams left, I believe, in the MVL. Tip City, Xenia.
Yeah, and their game's coming up in a couple weeks here. That will be very interesting because now that X is huge on their back.
Yes.
Now they're the ones getting patted on the back. Everybody's telling them, great job, you guys are the best, you dominated Piqua, you own them, blah, blah, blah. So how do they handle the success? Because again, now we've passed that pressure, and that's some pressure.
It is.
I mean, now, especially for a team like Xenia who hasn't felt that for years and years and years.
Right.
They haven't been the team to beat in the league.
Yep.
So now, okay, good, congratulations, you won big. Now what do you do with it?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see.
As we take a look at our stats against Xenia last week, Brady Uhl just 6 of 18 for 60 yards. Sam Schmeezing 11 carries for 40 yards. He also had 10 total tackles on defense. Colton Booker have a game, 16 total tackles. We only had 9 first downs and 122 yards of total offense, and we only had 62 rushing yards. I think that's the lowest amount of rushing yards we have had in years in a game. We also had 10 penalties for 69 yards. Only had the ball for 12 minutes too, Brian, last week. What are your final thoughts on this game from last week?
Well, I think that, we got it handed to us. We had some issues with Brady and coming in and out of the game with injury. We had, it all went wrong. I will say in the second half, they competed better than the first half.
Oh,
I will
definitely.
say by a long way.
Definitely.
I felt in the first half they were a little flat-footed in warm-ups. It was a little quiet on the sidelines. There wasn't a lot of energy.
No juice. They didn't have any juice
there wasn't at all. Remember, it was their first true road game a year. So, Belmont, I don't know that I count that. You go to a place where they are hungry, they are excited, they want your blood, and they took it. And you have to chalk it up to Xenia was the better team that night. Mm-hmm. All aspects of the game, it was kind of a nightmarish night from the start to the finish. I will say I saw some good things in the second half competitively. Mickey Anderson was all over the field, making tackle after tackle after tackle, putting hits on people. Yeah, I didn't see that in the first half. A lot of missed tackles. This has been a reoccurring issue, even dating back to the Belmont game, is missed tackles. So what they have to do is, again, this is one of those things where, okay, well, you got away with your missed tackles against the Belmonts of the world. You didn't get away with them against Xenia. So are you going to fix that? Or are we going to be 2-3 losses on the season heading in the playoffs?
Yeah.
It's up to them.
The one thing that drives me nuts with kids, and you were up in the stands, I don't know if you saw as much as I saw down the field. When we were missing tackles, it wasn't because we weren't wrapping guys up. We were going for the ball instead of tackling. And I see that in the NFL, I see that in the college, and you're giving up 5, 6, 7 extra yards on a play that was only going to gain 2.
And then with the size of those running backs and the quickness, and if you tried to just go for the ball, that dude was just going to shrug you off, throw you off, and be adding up. They didn't have a huge chunk plays necessarily, but it was like clockwork, 8 yards, 8 yards, 8 yards, almost every down. And a lot of that was missed tackles. A lot of that was letting guys get outside on you rather than staying in your lane. There's things to work on. That's the great part of this is you can go back and say, okay, well, if you fix that, next time we play Xenia, it could be different.
Yes.
So Coach Bill Neese, I'm sure, took this as, yeah, it stinks that Friday night, you're feeling rough, it's miserable, you lost. But then you say, you know what? I kind of feel a new energy in me. Now I got a chance to tell these kids, here's what we can do, and we can prove people we aren't that team the night we played Xenia.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on from this Xenia game because I'm still depressed from that one. As we move on here, it's time.
You're letting it hang around more than the players and coaches have. That's impressive.
What was more difficult was you go to the game, you're watching the game, right? So you're already watching it. And then when you come back in the next day, you work and you got to put that game together. So you're watching that game a second time. And then you watch it through to make sure you had everything done. So you watch that game a third time before you go out and post it.
I'll be honest, I was sitting in the crowd going, where's he going to find some highlights for this game?
And there was nothing.
There wasn't much to put together for that one.
No, there wasn't. I mean, I think that was the first game that I filmed that we haven't scored a point in 5 years.
Wild.
Let's go ahead and pay some bills right now, as we would like to thank all of our sponsors for the 22-23 school year. Kathy Henney, Little Caesars, Teach Tech Productions, Buffalo Wings and Rings, Dick Lumpkins, This and That Candy on Main, Harmony Systems, Crayex, Edison State, Dr. Littlejohn, Morris Comfort Systems, and Atlantic Sportswear. Thank you for all your support for the 22-23 season. As we move on, Brian, it's halfway through the season. We can start diving into these Division II Region 8 rankings. These are the top 16 teams. Number 1, Xenia. Number 2, Winton Woods. 3, Kings. 4, Piqua. 5, Edgewood. 6, Little Miami. 7, Lima Senior. 8 is Troy. 9 is Anderson. 10, Northwest. 11 is Stebbins. The Aiken game doesn't count for points. Sidney is 12, Ross is 13, Harrison 14, LaSalle 15, Withrow 16. If the season were to end today, round 1, it's Piqua Sidney.
And it's also with LaSalle Winton Woods in the 2-15 matchup. I'll tell you what, Winton Woods is saying no thanks.
Yeah, they don't want to play that game.
That's a big postseason rivalry.
Yeah.
But you're definitely not wanting that matchup. But I will say, as we felt like the sky was falling last week. You get dominated. But if you look at the region rankings, you say, they're still 4th.
Yeah.
So they really haven't lost a lot. Now, have they lost an opportunity to be number 1 in the seed? Probably.
Yeah.
But depending on how all the seeds fall, if you just never know. There's going to be the usual suspects. But you're going to be in the top 6 at least.
At worst, I feel like we're going to be 4.
Probably.
I think at worst is 4. I think our best, is probably 3.
Yeah.
Maybe 2, depending on how Kings and Winton Woods finish out. Xenia's still got to play Tip. And that's going to be that big game on the schedule. We could still win the MVL technically with Xenia losing the Tip and us beating Tip. So that's also a huge thing to look at.
Yeah, it's a long way to go. You're looking at the season, you're going, well, it feels bad now. But again, if you end up with 1 loss on the year, you're 3 seed.
Yeah.
Probably 2 seed maybe. And that's nothing. And you're not going to drop below 5, even if you were to lose to Tip probably. Maybe 6. But you're 6 and there's 16 teams that make the playoffs.
Yeah.
So it's not a concern. It's a matter of, okay, how do you handle failure? Success is fun, but then when failure smacks you in the face, are you going to go and, barely edge one out on Sidney, who probably isn't at your level, obviously, or are you going to come out on a mission and, dominate the rest of your schedule and get back to where you were?
Interesting stat, there are, out of the 16 teams, 5 MVL teams.
Yeah, the region is filled with MVL teams. Once you get towards the bottom, there's Withrow there, 1 and 3, LaSalle. Those aren't too bad of teams.
No, they play tough
schedules. So they'll get their points probably where they'll move up a little bit. You'll see like a Northwest maybe slide down.
Yep.
And then you might get a Belmont bump up because they play an easy schedule, which would be wild if they made the playoffs. But the schedule's the schedule. So, but this week, 1 game at a time. Again, that's got to be their mentality. You got to battle the battered helmet. That gets you right out of your slump anyway. We're playing our rival. We can't worry about that last week. Let's go do this thing and let's dominate our rival. They have, by the way. Side note, last 3 years, they've outscored them 115-7.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty impressive, and they've won 4 straight over Sidney. So, and 36 out of the last 42 overall, which is pretty wild.
And if you take a look at the last 4,
I may have I jumped
ahead
on you there.
We'll get that because I've got
I'm chomping at the bit.
I've got the scores for the last 4 years because we're 4-0 against Sidney in the last 4 years. Let's take a look at the matchups here for Week 5. A big game is the first one on the list. Tip City hosting Stebbins. Troy hosts Fairborn. Butler hosts West Carrollton. Xenia travels to Greenville. And then we got our Piqua Sidney game. Brian, Tip, Stebbins, huge game.
Tip's first true home game of the year. I think with Stebbins kind of the shine's off a little bit after losing 17-7 to Troy. I think Tip controls that game, wins by a couple touchdowns in the minimum. The rest of the games, you're not.
Who knows? Maybe Greenville will come out and just lay it to Xenia.
Xenia might be pretty flat coming out of a big win. Greenville might stick around for a little bit. Oh, and one other note, I'm looking for West Carrollton to maybe score a point this year. In the league play. They have yet to score.
If it was if we had these underdog picks of the week, right? This week might be the best week for West Carrollton.
Yeah. 1-3 versus 0-4.
I mean,
West Carrollton,
Butler is not very good.
Yeah. Over under on touchdowns for West Carrollton is 1.
Yeah.
Do they go over on that? I don't know. Against Butler. Butler usually plays pretty solid defense. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, West Carrollton, they've got the type of offense that can move the ball, though.
Yeah. They haven't been doing a lot.
But they haven't done it a lot, and they cannot punt the ball, as Brian mentioned during the game broadcast.
Special teams is not so special for West Carrollton.
No, they are not. All right, now it's time to talk about our game here tonight. The 127th meeting all time between Piqua and Sidney for the battered helmet. Piqua leads the series 81-39-6. Since Piqua's loss in 2017, 34-33, they've won the last 4 straight, 14-12 in 2018, 29-0 in 2019, 44-0 in 2020, and then last year's 42-7 win. Piqua's outscored Sidney 129-18 in those 4 years. The 2022 Yellow Jackets do come in with a 2-2 record. They started the season off losing badly to Bellefontaine 43-13 and Tip City 34-20. Last 2 weeks have been different though. They've scored a lot of points in their win in overtime against Greenville 49-48, and then they didn't score a lot of points last week in a 12-6 win against Butler. It's going to be Sidney's 3rd straight road game, and the Indians tonight are going to be looking for redemption for the loss last week and to extend the winning streak against Sidney to 5. Brian, what do we know about the 2022 Sidney Yellow Jackets?
Well, Sidney this year again they run a lot of buck sweep out of a hybrid. They kind of do a hybrid spread offense with a wing tee kind of blended together. They like to get the ball to Sam Reynolds, number 2 wide receiver. He has 21 catches for 300 yards. They're going to try to get him some touches. Their quarterback Tucker Herron has thrown the ball 75 times for 446 yards, but he only has 3 touchdowns with 6 interceptions. So you have an opportunity like Bryson did last year, turn him over, kick that and get himself a touchdown return on an interception. So, or you might be able to get some fumbles. So turnovers are probably going to turn out to be pretty important here.
Keys to the game. What are your biggest keys right now? And also, have you heard anything about injuries for us?
Well, I think that the key is, snap and clear.
Yep.
Clear out the memory from last week. You've already relived it over and over again, as you did with putting together the package.
Yes.
Package of highlights, aka lowlights from last game.
Yeah.
So now you've done that. You tortured yourself enough. It's time to come out with a fresh attitude, a fresh look, and be who you're going to be. At quarterback, we'll see who ends up playing. Brady's a little nicked, so then you have Kai, who could potentially get some time. You're gonna have to rely on all hands on deck. Everybody's got to be prepared. If my name gets called, I got to be ready to go out there and help, and I gotta get off my rear end and be aggressive and attack, because they really were on their heels last week.
Yeah.
And Xenia took them and knocked them on their rear ends after they were standing on their heels. So they really have to attack. Bill Neese is known for beating Sidney. He's 25-5 all time against them.
Wow.
So, and like I mentioned earlier, since 1985, 36 wins and 42 meetings for the Indians. So that's a heck of a run.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can almost guarantee since the 80s, when I'm not going to mention how old, is that Piqua would dominate Sidney in many different times. But again, there's no guarantees. When it's a rivalry, especially coming off a loss, are you going to feel sorry for yourself, or are you going to snap and clear and move to the next?
You know what's crazy is some people feel like the Piqua Sidney game is the game instead of Piqua Troy.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes you say, okay, well, how is this? You call it a rivalry, which it definitely is, but rivalries are better when both teams are winning once in a while.
Yeah.
And really, Sidney hasn't held up very well since that, as you mentioned, the loss 34-33 a handful of years ago. The last 3 games, 115-7. I mean, that's not a rivalry per se. You don't feel it. It was a little closer than you would appear last year for about a half.
Yes.
But then the second half was domination.
Yeah.
So we'll see if Sidney can, turn that mental page and be able to give Piqua all they can handle this week.
Any injury news out of anybody this week? Do you know?
Not entirely. Again, there's some guys beat up after last game, but there's no guarantees on who will play really at this point. I don't have anything specific. So.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure about that. All right, Brian, thank you for your insight as always. This will conclude our pregame show here. Just a reminder to everybody that all the games that we cover, whether it be football, soccer, volleyball, wrestling, basketball, it's all going to be delayed broadcast on our YouTube channel where you'll be able to watch all of the games following the conclusion of the games, immediately following. So when it's done, it goes up. Tonight's game will be available on Channel 5 starting at 1 p.m. Saturday afternoon. And next week's game against Fairborn will be just like last week's game against Xenia, as it'll be a condensed version and be available on Monday. Stay tuned for the 127th meeting between Piqua and Sidney with Tom and Brian on the call. For Brian, I'm your host, AJ Ganger, and the world's best boss saying good night. Go Piqua, beat Sidney.